To start us off, I would like to welcome Anna-Katrina Shedletsky, the CEO of Instrumental, to the stage. She's going to give us a little bit more about the why behind the event and then set the stage for the rest of the day to come. So everyone, please, in a warm round of applause, welcome Anna to the stage.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. So I'm going to do something a little bit maybe counterintuitive for a keynote, in which we're going to spend most of this keynote talking about you all and less about us. We have a few things way at the end about Instrumental, but really it's about setting the tone for today and how much you can get out of today. All right. Okay, so we've been doing Build Better. This is our fourth Build Better. There was a little hiatus there for a while during the pandemic, and this is ultimately a passion project. Technically comes out of our marketing budget, but it is a passion project. And it was because we found that there weren't really places for people like us to hang out. We either don't go to conferences because they're super salesy. It's hard to find like a high density of people that are solving the same challenges. Even if they're in different or adjacent industries, you might be able to go to an industry conference and talk to other people solving challenges in defense. But what is the opportunity to get together with people that are in adjacent industries and share learnings with each other? And so we've built this event around how we support leaders in learning from each other across these adjacent industries and solving the challenges they face every day in their companies and organizations. We found when we talked to leaders about where they learned about the best practices and the new stuff, it was usually through their networks. And those can be really hard to build once you get into a large established company where you get a feeling of like, oh, what I have to say is like under NDA versus not. And there's just like there's more insularity and less sharing. And so Build Better is really about cross-pollination and more sharing amongst the leaders in our industry so we can all build better products together, regardless of whether that is a consumer electronic device or something that is going to go into an AI factory of the future. All right. So this is a critical time because there's a lot happening in our industry in electronics manufacturing. There's several core industries that I think are right at the cusp of really important transitions. The first is in consumer electronics. There's the advent of AI is creating this opportunity for a complete refresh of how we think about how we interact with devices as consumers, and what AI means in our everyday lives, what agents mean in everyday lives. And it's creating new form factors, new types of products that didn't exist before. And that's really exciting because as engineers, we get to design new stuff and not just the next generation of the same rectangle we shipped last year and where all the values and the cost down that we're doing. So it's a very exciting time for consumer electronics. There's also a seemingly endless demand for AI infrastructure. So in that particular market, there is a massive growth and scale challenge that's happening right now with some of the most complex electronics being built, or maybe I would assert the most complex electronics being built at scale today are top-of-the-line AI infrastructure trays and racks that are going into all those data centers. You see all the news reports about the data centers and the power into the data centers, but you don't really see a lot of news coverage of like all the equipment that's going to go in there and make them work. And that stuff's really hard to build, and there's engineers here today that are working on solving those problems, and they have some very interesting things to share as well. And then there are hot conflicts in the world that are driving kind of this new wave of innovation in the defense tech space. And that's an interesting wave that has brought new folks into the circle, where there's innovation there that I think commercial markets can learn from and vice versa. And so I think there's this huge opportunity for cross-pollination between this adjacent industry and defense tech that hasn't really been brought into the broader fold of electronics manufacturing in the commercial side. And so I think this is an opportunity to do that as well. It's critical. So I think there's I sit in this interesting spot because I get to see inside of a lot of different organizations. It's a very rare opportunity. And I can see companies and individuals and leaders struggling with problems between different parts of these three markets and seeing opportunities where, oh, wow, like this market really has this down. And like, why couldn't this other market operate that way? And so I'm just going to share some of the things I've observed about these markets to get your brains going on like, what do I have to learn from the defense people in the room? What could I possibly learn? Well, I'm going to tell you. So for consumer electronics folks, they really have reliable execution at scale down. And this is something I would say is sometimes a differentiator, not always, but sometimes a differentiator to these other two industries. And I think how they've created processes and techniques around being able to execute at scale is something that everybody else in the room can benefit and learn from. So the AI infrastructure folks who are working on some of the most complex electronics in the world, they have a really interesting dynamic that is very different than the dynamic with consumer electronics companies. I grew up in consumer electronics. I worked at Apple for 6 years. I thought the whole world operated that way. It doesn't. And there's always this kind of trust concern, and the collaboration with the CM partner was always fraught in various ways. And what's really striking over the last couple of years as we've gotten deeper and deeper into the AI infrastructure space is just like how the brands and the CMs kind of hold hands and skip through the meadow together in a way that does not happen in commercial electronics. And I think there's just something really interesting about those dynamics. My theory is that everybody's making money, so everybody's happy. And in the consumer world, there's been like 2 decades of grinding down 1/3 of a cent at a time. But I think it kind of shows a pathway for a different way that relationship could work. And I think that's something that's worth learning about if you operate in either side here about the collaboration that the AI infrastructure folks have with their contract manufacturer partners. They also have unique ways of thinking about ecosystem development versus trying to own the platform, be the platform. How they work with partners and others, even those that could be considered competitors, is kind of an interesting element as well. For defense, there's some really fascinating things happening in the defense world today. And there is actually a lot of innovation. And frankly, we'll talk about it in a second. I'm just going to reveal our defense inclusion in today is actually all around innovation and what can be learned from the defense market and what defense can learn from the commercial market. There's a lot of innovation happening in terms of modularity, in terms of how they're doing MPI. The fastest MPIs in the world right now are actually in defense because the products they build may only be effective for 1 day before they are out engineered on the other side. And so that is a very different and dramatically different environment than on the consumer side. And so I think there's some really interesting things to learn from that are applicable. There's also this really interesting thing in defense called co-opetition, where, and my theory on that, so what is co-opetition? It's literally competitors bring each other to each other's lines and tell them about things that are going well and things that aren't going well. So literally people who are competing for the same contracts are doing that. And my theory on this, I don't know for sure, is that there is a sense that it's one team. It's like Team USA in this case. And so even though our companies are competitors, we have one mission, and that's a Team USA mission. And so it's very interesting what that leaves in the industry about how all those companies work together. And I'm not saying that can be immediately translatable over to these others, but I think there's things to learn from that, and that maybe a broadening and an opening of how we interact with each other and our peers in adjacent industries, or even our competitors, could maybe lead to some interesting developments. So just so you have a sense of who's here today, we have for the first time, we've worked hard to get folks representing the defense space to join us today. We got to about 10%, so thank you for making the trip and welcome to the fold of Build Better. And then you can see our distribution between high volume electronics and compute infrastructure. We also have some folks from another category that probably don't fit into any of these, so that's great too. We welcome you. And over 40% of the people here are executive leaders. So it's a very high density of people who are solving real problems on a daily basis in their organizations. Okay, So I think that as leaders, we're all really interested in one thing, and that's time to truth. So how fast can we discover, understand, and make use of the opportunities in front of us? That could be discovering the problems in an MPI as fast as possible, reducing risk so that we can ship on time. It could mean that we can get our product out to market in a certain way, as fast as possible to capture a market opportunity. It could be that we need to go figure out the ideal supply chain and build strategy that's going to work for the organization. But everything that we're focused on is trying to figure out truth. How do we get to truth as quickly as possible? And I think that truth drives speed and that time to truth. And so as we look at the frontiers of what has brought us together today, I curated the content today really based on what I hear from leaders as their kind of top challenges and what is the frontier in these different markets. And so while speed is certainly one of the frontiers, and we'll be talking about that today, speed is also driving other frontiers in our space. This has been a big year for build strategy. We'll talk about that in a second. AI, not just AI adoption and AI tooling, but what the data center investment is doing to the rest of our industry on the build side is fascinating and driving a kind of a huge frontier, as well as innovation. And what is the frontier of innovation in our space, which I gave you the spoiler. We're going to be talking about defense there. All right. So let's talk about speed. I think over the last year, leaders have really felt the pressure. I know I've felt the pressure where you need to do more with less. And the expectations have been ratcheting up. And so how do you achieve more with less? And some of that is, well, if we can identify and get to truth faster, then we can do more with less. We don't need as many people. We don't need them for as long. And so how do we operate in this new world, in this new paradigm where we've gotten this pressure? So that is at the frontier, is how fast can we really go, and what the difference is between urgency and recklessness, and how much risk different organizations can take on, and who has earned the right to take on risk. We're going to be talking about this in our first talk, which is all about how fast we could go. Like, what is the limit of speed in both an MPI context and in a ramp and production context? And we'll have two folks who are just, I think, based on everybody that I know, really pushing as fast and as hard as possible on that particular barrier. And so I think the sound barrier of speed, and I think there's going to be a lot of value there. So build strategy has been top of mind for many this year. Where do we build our stuff? One of the things that's been most frustrating in the last year is that we don't actually know how much it's going to cost us to build in certain places because they haven't decided yet. Regardless of whether you're pro or anti on tariffs, at least having something decided would be helpful. And so we've been in this year of flux where some places are decided, but it's a little unclear. Lots of companies are moving, some are wait and see. And so this idea that essentially where you build could be a fundamental part about whether your business works or not is kind of new to our industry. It has been very top of mind this year. There's certainly geopolitical concerns as I mentioned, those hot conflicts have kind of changed some of the perspective about where is it safe to build. And there's been a lot of talk about what we should outsource, what we should not outsource and insource, what we should make ourselves. And so we have a talk today, So there's no industry standard practice anymore. I think everything's on the table. Maybe it was always on the table, but it was kind of we'll look at whether we want to build our own factory, but really we're just going to go with Foxconn or whoever. And I think that this year, those conversations got to bloom more. And we have a session later today called Outsourced, which is talking not just about where to build, but also who on your team do you need to be in your team versus who on your team maybe doesn't need to be in your team. And some of the different strategies that different companies are using there, including building self-owned factories here in the United States, and how that's worked out, and some of the insight into, does that work? Can that financially tape out? And what are some of the benefits? So that'll be an opportunity to talk about this topic. I think AI has been a big part of this year as well. And I think there's multiple ways of looking at it. I think the first way that many people think about it when you say, oh, AI is a trend of the year, a frontier, they're thinking about tools, like how they're using AI in their work. And sure, that is a thing. However, I think there's a lot of skepticism still about like how useful a lot of these tools are and whether they're really providing the productivity benefits and gains. Are they driving reduction in time to truth, if that's the core metric? I think that in some cases they are, and in other cases they are not. We're going to have a kind of a hype versus real conversation today in our Frontier of Trust session, because in order for these AI systems to work, you really actually need a lot of transparency and trust with all the people in your extended network of partners, and that creates lots of challenges around who owns this data, who owns the insights, how we're going to share them. And actually, this is an interesting session because we tried really hard to get a perspective on this topic from both the brand side and the CM side. We got approval from C-suite level folks at various CMs, more than one, to come and have people come and talk about this topic, but we could not make it work. So unfortunately, what will be up here is really the brand-centric side, because we could not get folks from the CM side to come up and share their perspective. So for next year, if you know people who want to be up here talking about this topic, I think that is still a perspective we'd like to share, because I think that is ultimately where there is this challenge, is in that relationship between the two. And maybe they can learn from the AI infrastructure guys who are holding hands and walking through the meadow together. I think another piece is physical AI and how that's driving consumer upgrade cycles, or maybe not yet, but soon. We're seeing maybe the first products come out there that may have viable market traction. So that's very interesting to look at. I think that comes with new challenges because we're putting a lot of compute in small packages, a lot of which are wearable or like very close to the body and meant to be carried with you. And then the last piece is the data center demand, which if you work in consumer and defense, you might not really be thinking about how that's impacting your part of the industry, but it is. There's some of the most cutting edge electronics being built at scale happening in that market, and they're really hard to build. And so there's a lot of learning that's happening there that I think could be beneficial. But also there's a lot of lessons that have already been learned from everybody else building at that kind of scale that could be cross-pollinated there. So we'll be having a session today called the Frontier of Complexity that's really talking about what it means to build the most complex electronics in the world, and what are some of the learnings from doing that? What are some of the key either design or process learnings that could help everybody else in the room? All right. And then in terms of innovation, I really feel like one of the frontiers of innovation this year has been in the defense space. It's a little contrarian because you kind of view the defense folks as like maybe having to, based on regulations, have to be like further behind and less innovative. But that is not really what's been happening. It's clear, and it's become more and more clear, and it's something that in defense circles is like obvious, that wars used to be run with arsenals and a defense complex that could quickly build. And modern wars will be based more on speed than arsenals. And so what is our ability to actually create things quickly? I mentioned that concept of one-day ideas. This is from like some ministers of defense relating to the Ukraine war. And so this is actually a picture, for example, of all the fiber optic cables strung across the fields in Ukraine from the drones. So you can jam certain drones at certain frequencies. You can't jam them if they're running on a cable. And so what you end up with is a lot of cable everywhere. And this is kind of alluding to this point of like, well, you could build something and then literally the next day your opponent could out-engineer that thing. So how quickly can you actually get your new idea out and like to the front and into the conflict? And that's led to a lot of innovation at the forefront, I think, actually, from the perspective of the war in Ukraine. So I think what's challenging is that the largest players in the United States don't really operate this way and maybe can't operate this way. But there's probably ways in which they could change. And they're certainly under pressure from the upstarts in the space who are operating more like this or more modular and different and more quickly. And I think the other thing that's happened is that the tech world has welcomed defense, and we welcome you here today. I would say 5 years ago, it was kind of like, in Silicon Valley anyway, was not really a touchable space. And now we have folks who invest only in these types of companies, which is great. And so I think it's become more part of the conversation, and it's something that it's important to learn from each other from this space. And so we have a session today called Innovation in the Arsenal, where the whole idea is we'll actually start with someone who has some firsthand knowledge of like how that one-day ideas concept and NPI is actually happening in Ukraine, and talk about then how we can, in the commercial world, learn from that, and even how the defense world can learn from what's happening there. So I think it's going to be really fascinating. All right. So the last thing I want to kind of, on the innovation topic, that I want to emphasize is that innovation is pretty precious. And most of us here are leaders and have teams. And we're all under this pressure to innovate as quickly as possible. And it's really easy to squash innovation. And so another thing to think about while you're here is how you can leverage things you're learning or talking about, or the conversations you might have with other leaders to learn about how they're growing innovation within their organizations. Because it's very easy to kind of have misaligned goals to squash it, to have not the right mission or different missions, or have the wrong team on a particular topic and squash innovation. And so how can we as leaders ensure that the best ideas are always coming to the fore, and that we're actually able to make use of them and be as innovative as possible? We have to be really thoughtful about how we are and show up as leaders. And it sounds like a little hokey to say, but I genuinely believe that this is a cultural thing. And so the ethos of this event is to get people together and talk and share. And so I think this is an opportunity actually to talk about the cultures that we build in our teams to enable us to build the best products and have the most innovative technologies that we can bring to market. Yeah, and Keith Lucas, who is a mentor of mine, and actually wrote a whole book on building innovative teams, really talks about innovators as being people who reject rules and constraints. And those people are really powerful, but they're often the most agitating on your teams. And so how do you give the most agitating people on your teams large voices to ensure that they can be innovative and enable you and your organization to bring the best technology to bear? All right. So just very quickly, I wanted to share a couple things about Instrumental. It'll be super fast as it supports these frontiers, because we have been responding to our understanding of these frontiers over the last year to develop things that help our customers get there faster. So the first thing is that we're just trying to get better data off the line. We get great data today from our 20 megapixel cameras, which are often excellent at being able to find issues that cause first pass yield challenges or final yield hits, or help do FA in an MPI context. But this year we've been able to significantly upscale our ability to see some of the smallest components, driven frankly by the need to look at much larger pieces of equipment that still have very tiny components on them. And so we had a customer who, there are small components on their large server board getting knocked off. You need to be able to see that they are gone. And at this level of blur, which may be sufficient for a lot of other types of defects, you can't see. So we have released a high resolution version of our camera stack that enables us to now take pictures up to 61 megapixels. So you can actually have high resolution in a very large form factor, like the size of a standard L10 tray, so that's like a server size. Whoops. So you can still get the original, and the original is great, and it works for a lot of things. You're building something small, but if you're building something big, you can now do so with one camera. Of course, Instrumental can always take images from other sources, so if you have your own super high resolution sources, we can always take those images in too. The other thing we have always had customers push us on is the fact that 2D data is great, but it's not the only data that matters. And so this year we've added a third dimension, and you can now actually be able to take real-time measurements and intercept defects live on the line based on Z height. And so this is very useful for looking at board-to-board connectors. We have these very tiny 0.4, 0.6 board-to-board connectors in consumer electronics, or at batteries, to make sure they're not swollen and to improve just the safety of products that are going out. And so this is, we have a demo of this in the back if you want to take a look at what we can produce here. These images end up inside Instrumental, so you can actually see these heat maps as well as a visual image, and then you can also do these measurements in real time and reject based on them. Just like push the connector in and improve your first pass yield by not having disconnected connectors. So the last one is a little bit more complicated to explain, but essentially we had a customer who we worked with for many years that over this, on a very mature product, and they built this mature product in 4 or 5 global factories at any given time, same product. And over time, they essentially were able to build up this model list of over 4,000 models that were running on every single unit they built. And anywhere in the world where one unit would have an issue, a discovery would be made, they would be able to set up a test that would then be used everywhere in the world. And this really inspired and they were able to use Instrumental to do this, but because of how we set up the projects, it was challenging to do this. This wasn't like an out-of-the-box thing. But this makes sense, right? You're building the same thing everywhere. You want the same standard of quality everywhere. And so as we moved into the AI infrastructure space where it's more common to have multiple factories building the exact same product, we realized we needed a way better way to do this. And that actually it's not just sharing information amongst multiple sites. There's multiple levels of sharing of information and models that can be incredibly valuable. And so we call this synchronized learning, and this is one of our main releases for this year, which was led by Riley and many others on the team who worked on it, but our MC, so this is one of her major contributions. And it's really in being able to take the data from anywhere and ensure that that data synchronizes to all the other places that you've wanted. So if you're building on 2 different lines or in 2 different factories anywhere in the world, you're using the same model. And any failure that is found anywhere in the world makes everybody better. Or if you are building SKUs where 90% of the SKU is the same, you used to have to set up individual tests on each of those SKUs because there was difference. You couldn't just apply them. And now you can keep the parts that are the same, and all those models use data together, and the parts that are different, they're just different. And that's easy. So it makes it much easier to set up many, many tests. And then the last level down, well, let's talk about even on the same board. And in the AI infrastructure space, there's these data connectors, actually they have them in defense too, that have thousands of pins in them. And it's kind of like if they get damaged, it's kind of like a virus. You like plug a damaged one into the other side and it damages the receptacle, and then that receptacle is going to damage anything you plug into it. So it's a mess. So they have a lot of operators that literally have magnifying glasses trying to inspect all of these pins. And there are a couple of pieces of equipment on the market that are dedicated you can get to try to do this kind of pin inspection. But this idea that we can take repeating areas in the product and converge them into one model that synchronizes is something new that Instrumental has that enables us to look at these high-density pin arrays or anything else in the product that looks the same in multiple locations. So we have customers that have the same feature kind of matrixed across the product. And so you can essentially have just one model, even though you have 1,000 places that that feature might be. This is awesome because it means that you can get day one performance in these new locations. You add a new SKU, you have day one performance based on all the prior models that you've built. It enables you to rapidly build massive amounts of models that are looking for failures and defects and not have to program each individual one for every SKU. And so in high SKU environments, it's been an absolute game changer, and it's something we're really excited to bring to market and share with you today. So there's so much building to do, and I really want to encourage folks. I know we're kind of all engineers, and it's kind of hard to like meet each other when you don't know anybody, but let's try to use our energy to share with each other the things that we are seeing, the challenges that we're having, because the other person you're talking to might literally have the answer to that challenge. So there's a couple different ways that we're trying to encourage that today. You might have noticed at the entrance, there's these dots you can get. We should put them on both sides of the badge because the badge moves around. And so the different colors kind of reference different things that people might be interested in talking about, so you can have like a conversation starter. There's definitely people here who are both hiring, and there's people here who are looking. So there's definitely that. But you can have a conversation about some of these other areas that are the kind of key themes of the day. We have put some amazing people up on the stage today, but we recognize that everybody here has thought leadership to share. And so we actually do have, kind of by the entrance, there's an area there where we'd love to get your takes on a couple questions about what is the frontier, and what your perspective is on the industry. And we'll share that out with the broader community. If you do so, you can win shiny prizes. So that's how you get a raffle ticket into our awesome products that were launched this year raffle, if you take a look. And then we're also hiring. So if you have networks of amazing people, we have a ton of open roles, and we're hiring a lot of people in Q4. So we'd really love any referrals that you might have. So this is our agenda today. It is accurate on the website, so you can use the website as well, but to just kind of get you a sense. Last year we had a lot of content. This year we have less but longer content with more networking, so more opportunities to meet each other and to get benefits from each other's knowledge. And that's really what today is about. And that's it. Thank you very much.